From Yondu already knowing everything about Rocket's past, to the internet's claims of an Among Us costume, ticking James Gunn off. Here are the Guardians of the Galaxy Easter eggs you missed. Starting with the fact that Rocket's past wasn't a surprise for Yondu. I mean, obviously. Is there anything he doesn't already know despite him kinda being a moron? The guy barely gets Mr. Raccoon's name right, even calling him Ratchet Rabbit, or in some cases, plain old squirrel. But in the first film, there's a moment that really makes everything click in the latest entry. Of course, I'm talking about when he says that they're the same, and that scientists don't care about creations like them, letting Rocket know that they'd both been enslaved most of their lives. Back then, you probably just thought he was being but the final film finally lets you piece things together. So you don't just get an Easter egg, but also some great lore about the universe as a whole and Yondu's past, along with how his life connected to Rocket's. And trust me, the revelation will leave you shook. Turns out Yondu really did care about him after all. Honestly, I wish things had taken a different turn with Yondu, since his relationship with Rocket had so much potential after the big reveal. But I guess it was still a nice little goodbye to a really heartwarming character, though there's another character that hinted at something to come. Someone who's a pretty big deal in Volume 3. Of course, I'm talking about the High Evolutionary. You've seen him in those flashback scenes looking like a normal human. So there's no reason to think that he's gonna be anything else, right? Well, that's where the film caught almost everyone off guard. But it didn't do that without dropping a huge hint before the drama went down. While most of you might have missed out on Peter calling their final fight a face-off, there's a reason for it. The film knew exactly what it was doing with that face pun. So anyone who did notice was really happy to see Rocket rip off the High Evolutionary's face, right after he killed off a bunch of innocent animals. This big ol' villain fooled everyone with those looks, but could there be a deeper meaning to it all? I mean, they literally have a face-off moment, so it makes sense. All while bringing us one of the most intense moments the franchise has seen in a long time. Speaking of intense moments, remember Kevin Bacon from the holiday special? Everyone loves him, right? So it made sense for Gunn to bring him in one last time. This Easter egg is hidden away at the very end of the film, mainly in the post-credits scene, just as a gag. But it's still pretty funny if you saw the special. Though if you missed out on it for some reason, here's the gist of it. You've got Drax and Mantis trying to kidnap the actor for Pete's birthday, so he's traveling from Earth to nowhere, and it's a pretty wild ride. The Easter egg follows up on his story, now that he's back on Earth and can't stop talking about it in the news. To be fair, I wouldn't shut up about it either if that happened to me. You find out about it when Jason's reading a newspaper right at the end of the scene. While the article on it isn't the clearest out there, Bacon claims that he'd been abducted by aliens, letting the world know all about his adventure to nowhere. I mean, a callback like that is somewhat expected, right? But there's something even bigger that no one saw coming straight from the same special once again. Apparently, Peter and Mantis are siblings. You heard that right? And I'm just as surprised as you are. I mean, she lived with Ego for the longest time. Why is it so surprising? Could it be because they look nothing like each other? Maybe, but the whole thing is confirmed by both characters in the holiday spin-off. For anyone that missed out on it, Volume 3 still has a little Easter egg to keep you in the loop. Specifically that one scene where Nebula tells Mantis that Peter's her brother, but of course, they didn't have the same mom. You'd know about it pretty early on if that was the case, and the film doesn't really go too deep into their whole backstory. But by the look of things, they've found a lot of respect for one another. Plus, their relationship has really grown because of the big reveal, which is nice since you barely got to see them talk in Volume 2. Honestly, this film was just full of Easter eggs for longtime fans. There's throwbacks to Yondu, puns about the villain, and so much more. But don't you worry, there's no way I'm missing out on the smallest of details. I mean, can we just talk about the signs in Nowhere? Here's one that might not seem like a huge deal at first, but it's one of the most deep-cut Easter eggs in the entire film. I'm talking about the iconic sign that's basically the film's logo, but this time it's in an alien language. Just when you thought things started making sense, James Gunn threw in a bunch of signs that humans will probably never understand. And that's not even the best one. Remember that bar from the first film? This time around, they returned to the bar. But there's this weird sign that looks like a chopped off leg, which makes no sense the first time you look at it. Turns out, it's actually a throwback to another iconic moment from the first film, specifically, the time Rocket stole a prosthetic leg, as if there weren't already too many references to the first film. But the callbacks feel like home. The universe has practically changed with the audience, all in all creating a sort of thank you message for all fans out there. In fact, Groot talking for the first time just proves it. You heard that right, though don't go off thinking that he's speaking English. He's still emoting in that same dialogue you love him for, but this time, we as an audience now have the ability to understand him, and you're never gonna guess what he says. Of course, it's a huge tearjerker when he straight up says, "I love you guys." Though he doesn't just mean his gang by this, he's talking about the viewers as well. And that's what really makes this moment so special. Of course, the fact that this is probably going to be the only time the audience will ever hear him and actually understand what he's saying really takes things to a completely different level, making everyone fall in love with Groot all over again. Gunn even talked about it, saying that the only reason you understood what he was talking about was to tell people they're a part of the MCU too. Not just that, but it looks like he's going to be in the next Guardians team as well, so you're going to see a lot more of him fighting alongside Adam Warlock, though the MCU's version of him is a little different. Originally, in the first comic he popped up back in '67, he's supposed to be this genetically engineered person who's enhanced in every way imaginable. In the comics, he's engineered to have enhanced physical abilities, created by the Enclave to possess perfect mortal abilities. Sound familiar? Why, that's exactly what the High Evolutionary described him as. The first time you see Warlock in the MCU is in the post-credits scene of Volume 2, and everything is almost identical to the comic book version, except for the stone on his forehead, which is supposed to be the Soul Stone, but that's something the MCU is done with. So this time he's just got a bolt stuck in his forehead. It's how he gets all of his powers, but that's about all the info I have for you. I mean, I can't even say for sure whether or not the bolt shoots projectiles or not. So honestly, the fans were left with tons of questions about the use of the bolt. Though Aisha does give the audience a hint or two. Turns out that he was pulled before he was completed, and that's why he doesn't have the stone. But that's not the only time the wardrobe of the film left the fans in a state of confusion. I mean, who could miss out on those insane costumes? Those really colorful outfits the gang wore while breaking into OrgoCorp? Imagine someone robbing you while dressed up in Among Us cosplay. Honestly, I was left with a bunch of questions. What was going on with that whole thing? And that's exactly the reaction almost everyone on the internet had. The moment became such a big meme that Gunn himself had to step in to clarify things. The director called crap on that and said that Among Us had nothing to do with the costume. It was actually inspired by one of the best films ever, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Does it make sense now? Honestly, it's kind of hard to not think of it as an Among Us costume anymore. It really makes you wonder, did the game take inspiration from Space Odyssey too? So, from spacesuits inspired by A Space Odyssey to Yondu, knowing practically everything about Rocket's past. These were the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 Easter eggs you missed.